The tombstone wasn't there on Monday. Joel Carr knew every grave in Holloway Cemetery the way a librarian knows their shelves, not by memorizing every title, but by knowing the shape of things, the weight of the layout, the rhythm of the rows. 12 years working the night shift at Salem's oldest active burial ground does that to a person. You stop seeing graves as individual markers and start seeing them as a map you carry in your chest. So when he made his 11 p.m. rounds on Tuesday and found a weathered granite headstone sitting at the far eastern edge of Section D, right where a patch of dead grass and nothing else had been 24 hours earlier, he stopped walking and stood very still for a long time. He shined his flashlight on it. Harold Eugene Pitts, 1941-2019. He knew too much and said too little. Joel pulled out the laminated site map he kept in his jacket pocket, checked Section D. Harold Eugene Pitts was listed, plot D114, northeast quadrant. He looked up from the map and walked northeast. Plot D114 was empty, just dirt and dead grass, same as the spot where the stone now stood. Joel looked back at the stone, looked at the map, looked back at the stone. 40 yards of cemetery separated where Harold Eugene Pitts was supposed to be from where Harold Eugene Pitts currently was. Joel was a practical man, 53 years old, former Army, 2 bad knees and a good flashlight, and absolutely zero patience for nonsense. He'd heard the Salem tourist spiel 1,000 times, the witch trials, the haunted history, the ghost tours that wound past Holloway's iron fence every October weekend while he watched from inside and tried not to look annoyed. He did not believe in ghosts. He did not believe in curses. He believed in vandalism, sinkholes, surveying errors, and people who had too much time on their hands. He took photographs of the displaced stone with his phone, filed an incident report, called the morning supervisor and left a voicemail, finished his rounds. Everything else was exactly where it should be. He clocked out at 6 a.m., drove home, made eggs, and told himself it was a one-time thing. Wednesday night, he came in at 10 p.m. for his shift handover, and the outgoing guard, a 20-year-old kid named Bryce who always looked slightly terrified by the job, met him at the gatehouse with an expression that confirmed it was not a one-time thing. 3 more, Bryce said. Sections A and F. I marked them on the map. Joel took the map, looked at the 3 red circles Bryce had drawn. Same deal? Moved from their registered plots? Moved, Bryce said. He paused. And one of them, the name on the stone is different than what's in the records. Joel looked up. Bryce pulled his jacket tighter even though it wasn't cold. The stone says Margaret Elaine Cross. The records say that plot has been empty since 1987. Joel stared at him. Who, Joel said slowly, is Margaret Elaine Cross? Bryce shook his head. That's the thing, he said. I looked her up. I Googled her, checked the county death records, checked everything I could think of. He met Joel's eyes. There's no record of her anywhere. She doesn't exist. The iron gate creaked behind them in the October wind. Joel clicked on his flashlight and walked into the cemetery. By the end of his Thursday shift, Joel had documented 11 anomalies. He'd stayed 2 hours past clockout, walking every section with his site map and a fresh yellow legal pad, cross-referencing each stone against its registered plot location with the methodical patience of a man who'd once spent 6 weeks cataloging equipment inventory in a forward operating base in Mosul. If there was a discrepancy, he found it. If something had moved, he measured the distance and wrote it down. 11 stones displaced, distances ranging from 12 feet to 93 feet. No apparent pattern in the direction of movement. Some had shifted north, some south, some diagonally across sections without regard for the neat grid layout of the cemetery's original design. 3 stones bore names that didn't appear anywhere in Holloway's official records going back to 1782. 2 stones had inscriptions that had changed. Joel had photographed every stone on Monday as part of his standard weekly documentation, and comparing Monday's photos to what he was looking at now, the epitaphs were different. Not vandalized, not scratched over and recarved, just different, cleanly, as though they had always said what they now said. Monday, a stone in section B had read, "Beloved father and husband." Now it read, "He saw it coming and ran anyway." Joel stood in front of that one for a long time. He called the cemetery director, a dry administrative woman named Patricia Holt, at 8 a.m. She listened to his report with the silence of someone taking notes. "I'll have the grounds crew check for soil disturbance," she said. "Patricia, the soil isn't disturbed. That's what I'm telling you. These stones moved without anyone moving them. There's no tire track, no equipment marks, no—" "Joel." Her voice was patient, in the particular way of someone who has decided not to believe something. "Stones don't move on their own." "I know that." "Then someone is moving them." "There are no footprints, no marks. The ground around each displaced stone is completely undisturbed." He looked at his legal pad. 93 feet, Patricia. Someone moved a 200-pound granite headstone 93 feet across a cemetery in the middle of the night and left zero evidence of doing it. Silence on the line. "I'll have the grounds crew check," she said again, and hung up. Joel drove home and sat at his kitchen table and opened his laptop and started researching. He found 3 academic papers on Holloway Cemetery's history, Salem's oldest continuously operating burial ground, established 1698, used during the witch trial period. Several of the trial judges were buried there, along with a number of accused individuals whose executions were later deemed unlawful by the state. One paper, written by a historian at Salem State University in 2009, contained a paragraph that Joel read 4 times. It described a local legend, dismissed by the academic community as folklore, that Holloway Cemetery had been built on a site used for pre-colonial ritual burial, and that the ground itself was considered by indigenous accounts to be a place of judgment, a place where the dead did not simply rest, but deliberated. Joel closed the laptop. He looked out his kitchen window at the gray October sky, a place where the dead deliberated. He went back that night with a better camera. He found her stone again at 1 a.m. Margaret Elaine Cross, the woman who didn't exist. And this time it had moved again. 20 feet closer to the cemetery's center from where Bryce had marked it 2 nights ago. The stone itself was older looking than it had been, or maybe that was the light, but Joel crouched down and ran his hand across the granite face and felt the weathering in it. Real weathering, decades of it, the kind of surface erosion that takes generations of frost and rain to produce. This was not a recently carved stone. He photographed it from every angle. Then he sat back on his heels and read the full inscription for the first time. Margaret Elaine Cross, 1952 1989. She tried to tell them what the ground was saying. They did not listen. She was the third. Joel stared at that last line. She was the third. Third what? He flipped back through his legal pad, checked the other stones with non-standard epitaphs, the ones that read like sentences rather than sentiments. He documented 6 of them total now. He read them in order, squinting at his own handwriting in the flashlight beam. He knew too much and said too little. Harold Eugene Pitts. She saw it coming and ran anyway. Unmarked stone, Section B. He asked the wrong questions in the right place. A stone in Section F with no dates, just a name. Thomas W. She tried to tell them what the ground was saying. They did not listen. She was the third. Margaret Elaine Cross. He came back every night and never understood why. A stone Joel had found 2 hours ago in Section A with no name at all, just that epitaph. She kept records. It did not save her. Another nameless stone, Section G. Joel read them again, then again. He stood up slowly and looked around the cemetery. The rows of stones in the October dark, the iron fence at the perimeter, the distant glow of Salem proper beyond the tree line, the absolute silence of the place that he'd always found peaceful, and now found something else entirely. He came back every night and never understood why. Night guard came back every night. She kept records. It did not save her. He was holding a legal pad full of records. The flashlight flickered. Joel tapped it against his palm and it steadied. He looked back down at the nameless stone in Section A, the one that said he came back every night, and noticed something he hadn't clocked on first pass. The stone was new. Not new like recently weathered, new like recently placed. The edges were sharp, the granite face was clean, and the ground around its base, unlike every other displaced stone, which sat on completely undisturbed soil, the ground around this one was freshly turned, like it had just come up from below. Friday morning, Joel didn't go home. He sat in his car in the cemetery parking lot until 9 a.m. when the administrative office opened, then walked in and asked Patricia Holt's assistant for full access to the burial records going back to the cemetery's founding. The assistant, a young woman named Claire who seemed startled by his expression, gave him a visitor's badge and pointed him toward the records room without asking any questions. The records room smelled like old paper and something underneath it that Joel associated with the cemetery itself, that particular cold mineral smell of turned earth. Filing cabinets ran floor to ceiling along 3 walls. The 4th wall was shelving, holding hand-bound ledgers going back to the 1700s in varying states of preservation. Joel started with the modern digital records, a database going back to 1970, and searched for Margaret Elaine Cross. Nothing. He searched county death records through the database terminal in the corner. Nothing. He searched Massachusetts vital records. Nothing. He tried newspaper archives. Nothing. Margaret Elaine Cross, 1952 to 1989, had left no footprint in any record he could access. He pulled the physical ledgers for the 1980s. He found her on page 114 of the 1987 volume. Margaret E. Cross, interred November 3, 1987. Plot D77. Cause of death, undetermined. Next of kin, none listed. Arrangements,
County. Someone had drawn a single line through her name, not a correction mark, a deliberate, heavy line, the kind you make when you want something gone. Joel stared at it. He kept pulling ledgers, checking the names of every stone he documented against the physical records. What he found over the next 3 hours turned his stomach in a slow, specific way. Every stone with an unusual epitaph, every stone that had moved, every stone that bore a name not in the digital system appeared in the physical ledgers. All of them. Each entry crossed out with that same heavy, deliberate line. And in the margin beside each crossed-out name, written in a different hand than the original entry, was a 2-word notation repeated identically each time. Returned. Claimed.
Joel sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Returned from where? Claimed by what? He pulled out his phone and looked at his photographs from the night before, scrolled through the epitaphs again, read them as a sequence, knew too much, ran anyway, asked wrong questions, tried to tell them, came back every night, kept records. They weren't random, they were profiles, descriptions of how each person had engaged with the cemetery before whatever happened to them happened. He was looking at a pattern, and he had been, without knowing it, fitting himself into that pattern for 12 years. Night guard, came back every night, now keeping records. His phone buzzed. A text from Bryce, who was covering the early evening shift before Joel's 10 p.m. start. "Hey man, you need to come in early. Something happened." Joel was already standing up. "There's a new stone," Bryce texted, "in section E. You need to see it." A pause, then one more message. "Joel, it has your name on it." He drove back to Holloway, doing 60 in a 35. Bryce met him at the gate, phone flashlight already on, face the color of old chalk. He didn't say anything, just led Joel through the gate, down the main path, left at the oak tree, into section E. It was there. Same weathered granite as the others, same clean, deliberate carving, sitting in the middle of section E where nothing had been this morning when Joel had walked every inch of this cemetery before leaving. He made himself walk up to it. He made himself read it. Joel Henry Carr, 1971 dash. No end date. The second year was blank, just a dash and empty stone after it, as though whoever carved it was waiting to fill that part in. Below the dates, he came back every night and never understood why. He kept records. It did not save him. He found his name and had one choice left. Joel read it 3 times. His legs felt strange, not weak, strange, like the ground under him had changed density. He was aware of Bryce standing 10 feet back, and the wind moving through the October trees, and the distant sound of a car on the road outside the fence, and all of it felt very far away and slightly unreal. He found his name and had one choice left. What choice? He said out loud. The cemetery didn't answer. Cemeteries don't answer. Joel knew that. But the stone to the left of his, a stone he was certain had not been there this morning, had a fresh epitaph that he hadn't photographed yet, hadn't documented, was seeing for the first time. He turned his flashlight on it. No name, no dates, just text. The ground speaks to those who stay still long enough to listen. Most run. Running changes nothing. The ones who stayed and listened, they are the ones who understood what was being taken and why. You have until the third night. Joel stood absolutely still. Third night of what? Bryce asked from behind him. His voice was barely there. Joel looked at his phone, checked the date. He'd first noticed the displaced stones on Tuesday night. Wednesday had been the second night of documented anomalies. Tonight was the third night. He looked at the blank space after the dash on his tombstone. He pulled out his legal pad. At the top of a fresh page he wrote, "What is being taken and why?" He underlined it twice. If the stone was right, if there was one choice left, he intended to make it an informed one. He sent Bryce home. The kid argued for about 30 seconds before the look on Joel's face ended the argument. Joel watched him go, waited until the headlights of Bryce's Honda cleared the parking lot, and then turned back to the cemetery and started walking. Not his standard rounds, not the grid pattern he'd used for 12 years. He walked toward the center, the oldest section, the part of Holloway that predated the formal establishment of the cemetery, where the stones were so weathered that most of the inscriptions had been worn smooth by centuries of New England weather. He'd never paid this section much attention. The stones here weren't in the active records. Historians had cataloged them decades ago, and the county had declared them historical markers, untouchable, unfundable, essentially ignored. He walked among them now with his flashlight and his legal pad. The stones had changed. Not their positions. These ones were exactly where they'd always been, but the inscriptions, worn smooth for as long as Joel had worked here, were legible, crisp, as though the erosion had reversed itself, the letters rising back out of the granite with the clean definition of fresh carving. Names he'd never been able to read before, dates going back to the 1690s, and epitaphs, not the standard beloved wife and rest in peace of later centuries, but the same style as the moving stones. Sentences, observations. She warned the court. The court did not listen. She was the first. Joel stopped. She was the first. Margaret Cross's stone had said she was the third. He moved through the old section faster now, flashlight swinging, reading every legible stone. Found the second one near the center, a small marker, barely a foot tall, almost hidden by overgrown grass. He told the judge what the ground beneath the gallows was asking for. The judge hanged him anyway. He was the second. Joel straightened up and looked around the old section with new eyes. This wasn't a cemetery in the conventional sense, not just a place where the dead were put in the ground and left. This was something that had been operating, actively operating, for 300 years, selecting, marking, taking. The ground wanted something, had always wanted something, and it communicated what it wanted the only way ground can communicate, slowly, physically, through the movement of the things embedded in it, through the rising of names and the erasure of others, through a patient, 3-century-long conversation that almost nobody had ever stayed still long enough to hear. The ones who stayed and listened, they are the ones who understood what was being taken and why. He understood what was being taken now.
The ledger entries had told him that much. Every crossed-out name, returned, claimed, was a person who had gotten close to understanding, who had asked questions or kept records or tried to warn someone, who had engaged with the cemetery on a level beyond the transactional. The ground took them, but the stones said he had a choice. He sat down cross-legged in the center of the old section, legal pad on his knee, and stayed very still. And for the first time in 12 years of night shifts, Joel Carr actually listened to Holloway Cemetery. What he heard took until 4 a.m. to fully understand. When he finally stood up, his knees screaming and the October cold settled deep into his bones, he knew what the choice was. He wished he didn't.
4 a.m. in a cemetery in Salem in October is a specific kind of silence. Not peaceful, not empty, full, packed tight with something that isn't sound but registers in the same place sound does, behind the ears, at the base of the skull. Joel had always categorized it as atmospheric, the particular acoustics of a walled space full of stone and old trees. He didn't categorize it that way anymore. He walked back to Section E, back to his stone. The blank space after the dash was still blank. He looked at his watch. 4:07 a.m. Roughly 2 hours until first light. The stone to the left, the one with the message about the third night and the one choice, had changed again. New text below what he'd read earlier. The choice is simple. Leave and never return. The ground will find someone else, someone who does not yet know what you know. Or stay and add your knowledge to what is buried here. Both options have a cost. Joel read it twice. Leave and let it take someone else. Someone younger, probably. Bryce, maybe, who was already scared and already asking questions. Or Patricia Holt, who'd dismissed the reports but would eventually have to come and see for herself. Or the next night guard. Or the historian who wrote that paper about the judgment ground who'd been getting closer than she probably knew. Or stay. Give himself to it. Add what he knew to whatever was accumulating down there in the dark beneath 300 years of Salem's most complicated dead. He sat on the cold ground in front of his own tombstone and thought about his life with the detached practicality of a man doing an honest inventory. Divorced 9 years ago, kids grown and in different states. The apartment he went home to each morning had a couch, a kitchen table, a laptop, and a 12-year collection of cemetery site maps that he'd kept for reasons he'd never fully examined. No pets. A few friends from the army who he talked to on the phone every few months. A sister in Vermont who called on birthdays. He thought about Bryce, 20 years old with his whole uninformed life ahead of him. He thought about the historian at Salem State who'd gotten close enough to write a place of judgment in a paper that probably 12 people had read. He thought about Margaret Elaine Cross, 1952 to 1989, who had tried to tell them what the ground was saying and been crossed out of the record with a heavy line. He picked up his legal pad. He started writing. Not notes, not documentation, but everything. Everything he'd figured out over the past 3 nights. The pattern of the epitaphs, the sequence of the numbered dead, the way the ground selected its subjects, the choice it offered, all of it in his plain, army-precise handwriting on yellow legal paper. When he finished, he tore the pages out and folded them carefully. He took out his phone and texted his sister in Vermont. "Hey, love you. I'm doing okay. Don't worry if you don't hear from me for a while. I'm working on something important." He put the phone back in his pocket. He looked at his tombstone one last time. The blank space after the dash had filled in. 2024. Joel exhaled slowly, looked around Holloway Cemetery one final time. The rows of stones, the iron fence, the October sky going the specific dark blue that means dawn is still an hour away, but has started thinking about it. 12 years. He knew every inch of this place. He stood up. He made his choice. Bryce came in for his Friday evening shift at 6 p.m. and found the gatehouse empty. Joel's car was in the parking lot. His jacket was hanging on the hook inside the gatehouse door. His flashlight was on the desk, next to his legal pad. The cover page labeled Holloway Cemetery, Incident Documentation, J. Carr, in his precise handwriting. Bryce called Joel's cell, voicemail. He called Patricia Holt. She sighed and said Joel probably just stepped out and to do his rounds and stop bothering her. Bryce did his rounds. In Section E, he found Joel's tombstone. Same weathered granite, same clean carving. Except now, the stone had a complete inscription. Both years filled in, the dash between them no longer open-ended. And below the dates, the epitaph had changed entirely from what Bryce had read the night before. Joel Henry Carr, 1971-2024. He came back every night until he understood why. He kept records. They are buried with him. He chose to stay so that another would not have to. He was the fourth. Bryce stood in front of it for a long time. Then he looked at the stone to its left, the one with the message about the third night and the one choice. The text that had been there was gone. New text in its place. The ground thanks you for your patience. The knowledge has been added. The cycle continues. The fifth has already been selected. Bryce looked up from the stone, looked around Section E. At the far edge of the section, just at the boundary where the grass gave way to the old gravel path, a new stone was sitting. Fresh placement, sharp edges, clean granite face. He hadn't seen it on his way in. He walked to it. He shined his flashlight on it. Bryce Allen Mitchell, 2004. Dash. The second year was blank. Below it, 4 lines. He found the records Joel left behind. He read them when he should have burned them. He came back the next night anyway. He had one choice left. Bryce stood in the 6 p.m. October dark of Holloway Cemetery with a flashlight shaking in his hand and read his own name on a tombstone, and understood with the specific clarity of a person who has just run out of the comfort of doubt that whatever Joel Carr had learned in his last night in this place, he was about to learn it too. His phone was already in his hand. He could call someone. He could walk out the gate right now. He could get in his car and drive and not come back. He looked at the stone. He had one choice left. He thought about whoever the sixth would be if he walked out that gate. He put his phone back in his pocket. He opened Joel's legal pad to the first page and started reading. The iron gates swung shut behind him in the October wind. From somewhere beneath Section E, beneath the freshly settled earth around Joel Carr's new stone, something that was not quite sound and not quite silence rose up through the ground and spread outward through the roots and the clay and the 300-year dark of Holloway Cemetery. It was, if you stayed still enough to hear it, something almost like satisfaction. The fifth had chosen to stay. The ground had known he would. It always knew. So, if you like this story, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or suggestions, comment below and hype this video. Thanks for watching.